Welcome back to the Show My Scars podcast. I'm your host, Derek Duker. Today I bring you a conversation I had with award-winning author Scott Gordon. He has a book out called Head Fake, which features a character named Mikey who makes everything a joke, even his clinical depression. After a run of failed jobs, he becomes the basketball coach at a high school for high-risk offenders who also experience mental illness. The reviews that are out on this book, which I'll bring up in the episode, were spot on for me. I laughed throughout the book when I related to Mikey's way of inserting humor into situations that may be viewed inappropriate. And I felt incredibly uncomfortable hearing various characters' negative thoughts that I know all too well. Overall, though, I really enjoyed Head Fake. I thought it was an authentic look at someone trying to make their way through life as they struggle with mental illness. So let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Scott Gordon. Why don't you, for those of us who haven't had a chance to read it yet, can you give us a quick rundown of Head Fake kind of from your side? I've read the synopsis and everything, but I guess just go through the story of how you got started on that book.
I can start. I'll give you the sort of the elevator pitch, and then I'll tell you kind of how I came to it.
Yeah.
Does that work? So the elevator pitch, it's a story of high schoolers and their coach creating a basketball team that may save them in ways therapy and medication can't. And it's a story about found families, mental illness, humor, coping mechanisms. It definitely lives in the mental health / mental illness world. It takes place at a high school for kids that are experiencing mental illness and have been arrested or had some sort of run-in with the law, been displaced from their homes, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I came to it years ago. I worked for high-risk kids with mental illness, and it was an unbelievably rewarding position that I did for a while, and would still be doing it if it paid anything at all. So,
right.
But it really was an amazing experience to be able to get in with these kids and kind of be there with them and what they were experiencing and help them with in any way I could. It was a home-based program. So I was really working with them in their lives, whatever they needed. Sometimes we were just going out for a meal. Sometimes we would go to a game, sometimes just have lunch and just kind of talk through what was on their mind. Could be really heavy experience they were going through. It could be something really small. It could be that we were talking about nothing much in particular that had to do with their mental health, just kind of talking through what was on their mind.
Yeah. How did you end up in that kind of work? Is that something that you went to school for and wanted to do, or?
Absolutely not. I was always interested myself in mental health. I had some depression when I was younger, and had seen a therapist and read every book that I could on, I would just say, kind of the philosophies of the different schools of thought around mental illness, starting from Jung and Freud and talk therapy and all sorts of stuff. So I was always interested in it, but coincidentally, I was driving a van at a hotel in Colorado, and I had met someone, and they had said, and spoke to them just kind of casually, and they had said, would you ever want to work with high-risk kids with mental illness? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what that is. And why would you ask me that? I'm a driver. And so she said, well, we need males to work for the county with the male kids, because a lot of the people in the field were female that were working in the field. So I said, I would certainly give it a shot. And the women that were working for the county were so good and so kind, and taught me really everything I needed to know. And one of the cool things was that if you were working with these kids, you would also meet with a counselor so you could sort of download your week, right? So I was able to really kind of make sure that as I was helping them, ideally, that I was not allowing myself to slip into a bad place by, taking on some of the things that they were going through. So it was kind of baptism by fire, but it was an incredibly rewarding experience. One that stayed with me, so that when I sat down to really think about what I wanted to write about, it was sort of, this was the only thing that showed up.
I was interested in what made you choose basketball as the central metaphor in the story. Is there some sort of significance to that?
Yeah, I'll tell you, there's a few different reasons. One is I really wanted to create a story showing how connection is so important. And sports is one of those things that if you're on a team, you're sort of forced into a connection with people. And so I thought, if I could create a situation where they're all kind of forced to be together and to give them one goal. It's really important, I think, to have a goal, especially when you're dealing with mental health issues. And the goal of these kids becomes to at first win a game, because they haven't won a game all of last year, and then it comes to really to keep winning and to grow as a team, and they grow individually with it. So it was really finding that kind of teamwork was the most important thing. The second thing is I am writing a book with a lot of mental illness in it, and I needed to think of a way to keep the pacing going.
Yeah.
And I think using the basketball season and using the game, sort of the energy and the pace of them, was a way to always keep the story buoyed, to never let it dip down into too heavy an area. So I was very conscious of kind of the movement of basketball and the movement of not letting the reader get brought down into any one person's struggles too much before they were up and out onto the next thing. So there's a lot of stuff you'll see when you read it going on that some is very light, some is funny, and some of it is real struggle. And so to keep all of that going was the basketball.
I wrote down one of the reviews that I read that I found interesting. Your novel was described as poignant, hilarious, and sometimes uncomfortable. And so how did you navigate using, I mean, you kind of did it with basketball as well, like you just said, but using humor to address difficult topics like the clinical depression and the violence among youth, because that's kind of how I get by in life, is, using humor to kind of cope and get through day to day. So I was interested in seeing how you were able to use that in your book as well.
So, I think that humor is probably the best coping mechanism that I know about. And, there is a humor that goes on when you're dealing with high-risk kids with mental illness that, it kind of goes back to, people may be saying stuff about us and making fun of us, but there's no way they're doing it as well as we are. Yeah. So I think that it's really important to bring humor to be able to see kind of the joke, even when you're struggling through depression, or, a lot of these kids that I was working with and in the story have some really difficult, bipolar and suicidal ideation and all sorts of stuff that they're dealing with, PTSD, very, very severe ADHD. And the one thing that I noticed when I was working with them is there was sort of a pervasive humor that ran through everything. And it was what made the time with them so enjoyable, we got to laugh. Even when we were talking about things that were very difficult, with tears in our eyes, we were still able to laugh through a lot of it. And I think that that's an important thing to always remember. And I think that when you have a team, whether it be basketball or whether it be just, in sort of group therapy, there becomes a kind of inside joke mentality. And I think that, at least when I was working with the kids, there was always talk of, well, the normies wouldn't understand this. And I think there's a humor to that. And I wanted to make sure that lived on every page in the book.
Yeah, I have to imagine some of them kids might have actually taught you a few things. Is there anything that you're able to share with us in that regard?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they taught me so much more than I taught them. I mean, they have their perspective on life, I think, was really great, because as heavy as it was, and they were younger, so things were oftentimes very dramatic for them, but they always had a sense of humor about it, and they were always cracking jokes. And to me, before I was working with them, I kind of, used humor as a coping mechanism for myself, but I didn't see how useful it could be to opening people up and to really allowing them a space to be. And they definitely taught me that. I always tell this story. The first kid that I worked with, after being trained, not very much at all, and he got into my car and he said to me, I can make you disappear if I want to. And I said, without even thinking, I said, what are you, a magician? And so he started to laugh. I started to laugh. And he was obviously posturing and trying to be a little bit of threatening to protect himself. And I realized what would have been a very difficult situation to get through to him, we just worked it out right away. And it was because of that. And I would say that was probably the biggest lesson that I got from working with the kids, was there's different ways to meet people where they're at. And I think humor is a good way to explore that.
Hey, business owners. Are you tired of marketing agencies trying to sell you on their services instead of helping you solve your problems? Yeah, I know the feeling. As they are wont to do, Two Oddballs Creative does things differently. They like to ask themselves what it's like to be in your shoes. They prize personal, customized service over one-size-fits-all approaches, and they treat every project as if it were one for their own business. So if you're ready to be treated with empathy and respect by your marketing agency, you need the Oddballs. You can reach them at twooddballs.com, that's the number 2, oddballs.com, or by phone at 417-986-6332. Another review that caught my eye, speaking of comedy, was like, you had Chris Rock wrote something nice about your book. Being an NBA fan myself, I noticed Nick Nurse was another name that popped off the page. What was it like to receive? I mean, you've got, you were named to, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Kirkus Reviews Best Books of 2024. There was another award that I saw that you might be in line for. What was it like to have your work recognized like that?
It was great, different for different people, for a book that has a lot of comedy in it. Obviously getting a thumbs up from Chris Rock was huge. I love his humor. So that was amazing. As far as Nick goes, I was so nervous to have him read it because he's a professional basketball coach, NBA Coach of the Year. So I was nervous that I had messed up some of the basketball and some, but he loved it. And I had asked him if he had saw any mistakes in the basketball, and he said he didn't. I'm sure if he did, there was stuff that he knew that probably nobody else would know. So, I think, and then the awards are always really nice. Everybody loves a little external validation. So that stuff's always good. And it's good to help sell books, is to have that sort of what they call social proof, that people that or an award that you've heard of or are aware of recognizes the book. It's that much closer for someone to pick that one to read, because all books are competing. If you haven't read War and Peace and you're thinking what your next book is, and you see War and Peace and you see Head Fake, you're not only competing with the books that came out this year, you're competing with the books that people haven't read. So you do need to have some kind of validation for people. So I think getting that stuff was really exciting and really important.
What were some unexpected joys or challenges that you had while writing the book?
I think the joys were, and I usually have this when writing, is I don't outline. So it takes me a lot longer to write a book than it does most people, because I kind of make it up as I go along. I think about characters, I do research, I think about kind of where I want to go and what I want to say and the tone of the book. And then I kind of just trust my instincts on where it's going to take me. So what I learn along the way is really everything the reader's learning as they go. So, I really learned how much I thought humor was important to mental health, and how much teamwork and working as a team is important to mental health, and that connection. And, all that stuff kind of, I was vaguely aware of and wanted to explore. But as I did explore it, I learned what I felt, and I learned kind of by letting these characters come to life. I learned really how things could be with a very, very deep connection between all these characters, how they could surmount very, very difficult obstacles. They do kind of live for me as I'm creating them.
That's so cool. I can't imagine not working with an outline myself, because I could see myself getting way off topic there.
And I do get way, I kind of have to, there's something in writing called, you got to cut your darlings. And I could go off in a tangent that I love and realize, wow, this really doesn't serve the story at all, and have to get it out of there. But, for me, when I do write with an outline, and I've done before, it's not as exciting for me, because I kind of am following a roadmap, and I don't want to know where I'm going necessarily.
How do you work up motivation to put something on a page? Like, what was your process like, I guess?
So my process is, I wake up in the morning and write, at least 3 or 4 days a week, and I force myself to do it. And so if I'm not writing, then I'm sitting and staring at the computer. And so there's no kind of, I've heard writers and people have, they need this big inspiration, and they, I just sit down and just start doing it and see what comes out. I've been asked quite a few times on, where my inspiration comes to write. I kind of treat it like, it's a business. I got to punch in at a certain time. I got to punch in at 8 a.m. and punch out at 10 or whatever it is that I'm writing. And I just force myself to do it. And I don't self-edit myself. So I let the inspiration kind of pour out in real time onto the page. And then, the next day I'll sometimes look at it and be like, wow, who wrote this awful stuff? or I'll say, oh, this is pretty good. I can use this.
The main character, Mikey, he faces clinical depression, right? That was his big thing.
Clinical depression. He's been unhoused for on and off. He's got very severe ADHD. He's got a lot of different things going on. Out of all the characters that are in this school for some form of mental illness, he's essentially a little bit worse off than they are when he comes in. So it's one of the things I decided was I didn't want to write a savior story where there's a bunch of downtrodden kids and somebody comes in and is able to help them all and saves them. I thought it would be really interesting to introduce someone into that equation that's worse off than them and see what happens.
Yeah. What message or encouragement do you hope the book offers to individuals who, like him, feel like, everything is kind of happening all at once? It is how I kind of felt like when I was reading the description of that character. I don't have the same issues as him, but I can definitely relate to the feeling like they're on the edge of breaking down under life's pressures.
Yeah, the big message for me is, don't give up. There's life, there's so much out there. There's so much in life that is great. And it can feel in certain times that it's insurmountable and you have so many issues and it's just pulling you down. But all it takes sometimes is a connection to someone or a little pivot, or it could be anything, going out on a walk and changing your physical location, anything can really, put you in a different place. And also I think it's very important to have a goal, something that you're shooting for that's not, I'm going to make myself healthy, because I'm going to make myself healthy is there. That's something that you're working on. But to give yourself some external thing, in the book I play with that they need to come together as a team and win a game. And it could be anything. It could, you just need to figure out what's going to be a motivation for you to go do something different, to conquer something.
Yeah. Is this book something like that for you in a way?
In a way, I'm a writer, so I've always written short stories and screenplays and all sorts of stuff. But for me, I always have a project going, whatever it might be. I always have something that I'm thinking about or working towards or working on. Usually I have something I'm working on and another project I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I feel like that's been helpful for me as well. That's kind of what this podcast is all about for me, is just like a creative outlet and something that I, feel good about doing, sharing work like yours, or, talking to somebody, in the area I'm from that, is either a therapist or somebody with some helpful and positive advice for people. And it has kind of accidentally set a routine for me in a way,
Mm-hmm.
which is also something that's very beneficial for, myself. I have generalized anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder. So a routine really, really helps individuals like myself. But to have something, like you say, to pull for and to look forward to, like the conversations I have on here are some of my favorites, and meeting, I never would have met you had without the podcast. Well, I guess we would, because of our mutual friend Nora. But
Yeah.
As a fellow creative, you talk about that time where you will read that stuff next day, and either it's something that you can work with, but or otherwise you feel like, who the heck wrote this? How do you deal with some of the automatic negative thoughts that creatives have? Because sometimes it wears on me. Sometimes, like, if I hear something in my podcast that I don't like that thought can linger with me into the next episode and to several episodes down the line. How do you manage that?
You can't stop them, those negative thoughts that creep in and linger, right? I think that you have to sort of greet them, look at them, say, okay, you're here, you're going to be around for a while, and work through them. I think when they move over into kind of obsessional thinking, is when you sort of have to have a tool to sort of get out of it. And for me, it's always been to go do something else, to work through it. But I think when those thoughts creep in, and the thing is, everybody has them. Every creative has them. I mean, it just, I think a lot of people write because of them, to prove something to themselves, to get something on paper, to explore a central theme. I think that those negative things are important, and I think it's important to acknowledge them and to sit with them and to not chase them away. To give them room, and eventually, it's not going to be so important for you to be paying attention to that. And they sort of go away on their own, and they may come back and they may not. But, I think personally, it's, if you have those negative stuff creeps in and you try to fight them, that's never worked for me. But kind of greeting them, saying, hello, old friend, I haven't seen you in a little bit. So, you're here, but I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing.
For me, I always feel like I'm able to reframe it in a way, using that. I tell myself, oh, it's just something that you're holding in importance. And that means that it's probably telling you something, like there's either a lesson to learn, or it's just that, you care deeply for what you're working on.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. I mean, you wouldn't have that thought if it wasn't something important, that, at least important to you, that you're working on. So I believe, I think that's really true.
Are you working on another book yet, or are you going to wait for a while?
I'm working on another book, which is completely different. It's about a story set in the 80s about a filmmaker that journeys through India, where religion and myth collide. So I've taken a step out of the mental illness world and gone into something else, which I do. I don't like to ever pigeonhole myself into one thing. I like to explore so many different things.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time tonight. I don't want to keep you very much longer, but before we go, definitely want to let people know where they can find your work. If you want to plug your personal website.
I actually don't sell it on my website because it's just too time consuming to be able to like mail things out.
Okay.
I think I don't sell it on my website because I'm too lazy. But yeah, the distributor has it everywhere. So it's if you go in Google and write Head Fake by Scott Gordon, it'll come up and you could get it. If you're someone that supports only independent bookstores, then you can go online. I'm actually doing it right now as we're talking. You can go online and find it. I don't know if you've ever explored bookshop.org.
No, I actually have never done that.
Yeah. So bookshop.org is basically, it's a funnel to independent bookshops. So you could go in there and, you click on that and that'll bring you into a search engine. And they have everything. And it's for people that don't want to give their money to Amazon.
Yeah, because I definitely do that. I always try to check out the local bookstores first.
The best thing to do is if you go there to your local bookstore and say, can you order this for me? They get it for you, and then they're the ones that make the money as opposed to Amazon or anybody else. So, if you really want to support a specific local bookstore, just have them order it for you.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and for writing about this in a way. Like, I know people are probably getting, but I know myself, I have like a half dozen self-help books sitting next to my bed, but to read something like this, it's a fun read as well. And apparently sometimes it is uncomfortable, but
well, I think anything that is authentically dealing with mental health struggles is going to, it'll push your corners on some stuff, but not in a way that will be triggering. I think that was something I was very conscious of. I wasn't looking to trigger people, but I was looking to be very authentic, because I think for the reader and for the population that I am describing, I owe it to them to give the most authentic version of what I know and have experienced to them. But also to be aware that I'm dealing with mental illness and mental health, and with that comes a responsibility, which I take very seriously.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. And again, thank you for coming on here and agreeing to come on the show and share the book with us. That's Head Fake, that you can find anywhere books are sold, and definitely try to help out the local bookshops as much as possible by ordering it the way that we discussed.
And when you order one, tell them to get another one for their shelves.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on.
All right, Derek. It was a pleasure.